I'm Paul Sims, and I'm here with
Spider.
Spider what?
That's you. It just went nowhere.
It's enough, right?
Go ahead.
Vicki Lewis.
And Joe Furey.
Now, the interesting thing to note about this episode is that
I think maybe we should wait. Wait for the visual.
Wait for the surprise.
Yeah,
All right.
let's wait for the visual.
What's
This
the
is,
surprise?
What is this episode?
This episode is
clue.
called Copy Machine.
Oh, right.
This is another episode from season 4. We're very blessed today to have Vicki with us. One of the, in fact, the only cast member who showed up today. It's very nice. Do we really have to wait
to
for
see.
surprise?
Nice to see you.
Let's not wait.
Well,
Well,
no,
there's
let's
a
wait.
thing with a tie that occurs.
Yeah, well,
Is
don't
that-
give it
I don't-
away
I'm
yet.
not going to.
I don't know.
I just-
It looks like the shots are kind of off, though. I remember this was an episode that was hard to put together in the editing room.
yeah.
Yeah, it's like we didn't get
the framing seems wrong.
We didn't,
Really?
Yeah, we didn't. Like a lot of the close-ups are a little too close, and the wide shots are a little too far back, and it was
That's
just,
Yeah, it seems like something was just off.
yeah, it was a hard one to cut together. And I even thought I do remember this episode. Also thought the performances were a little weird. Like
Really?
I mean, I thought
Yeah.
everyone was good, but I thought,
Just like off.
yeah, it felt like
Who
people-
directed? Not that I'm going to place blame.
No, but who
I
did?
don't
Oh wait,
know.
no, who did?
Who did direct?
I have
Who
no
did direct
idea.
this one?
Joe Furey
Joe, did you
directed this one.
direct it?
They're trying
Did you guys know that while you were saying it's
they were-
all wrong?
They're trying to wait for the thing to come up, but
You're waiting for the
I guess
visual.
it's never going
Oh,
to
wait,
come up.
who died?
I guess there's
Oh,
no credit
Someone
for it.
died. I just didn't want the audience to miss
I guess the credit doesn't come up till after the.
Yeah, no.
Look, wait. It's
Well,
gonna...
I was actually kind of hoping, Joe, that you'd forgotten yourself.
I
that you
actually
directed
did
it.
when you first started saying it. Then I suddenly realized.
Yeah, but is it Joe's fault that the shots were off? There's camera people, and you were watching.
Well, the
right?
shots weren't really off.
They
I
are
was
just
Oh,
trying.
you were just kidding.
That's
see, I
what.
didn't
That's what
even
clued
know.
me in as to what they were talking
I
about.
never
when they were
realized
saying.
Dave parted his hair so far to the.
Could be a
Above
wig.
his-
No.
Oh, no, that's like the wig
We were
era.
beyond the wig at this point. So Joe was a writer, is a writer, producer, whatever, and this was the first episode of the show that he directed, and I think the last.
That's right. Yes.
Yeah.
Not
Don't know.
because it wasn't well directed. I remember
No,
this
it was
going
fun
very
with you,
It
Joe.
may just be a weird
Oh,
coincidence.
thanks.
It was. I remember that. It was good energy.
Well, that's nice.
Yeah.
Vicki
You
Lewis
guys
No one
were
was
fun.
turned on you.
You guys were great. It was great doing it with you guys too. You were all really fun and
Finally, we have a commentary where we actually have genuine stuff to talk about now.
Yeah.
Vicki, was it weird having Joe direct? I mean, you said already that there
No,
was
because you know why? It was the outsiders who were weird because they didn't quite, they weren't in the nucleus, and Joe understood, we all shared a similar sensibility, and so we trusted Joe, and
well, that's nice.
yeah, no, I found it to be really comforting.
Joe, was it harder or easier than you thought?
It was actually easier because of it sounds ridiculous, but I mean because of all of them, because they were great to work with, and they were so good that you didn't have to do that much to get them to, get the performances or get the energy up. And
Were you nervous on the first day of rehearsal, being downstairs on the stage rather than?
yeah, no, I definitely was. It was weird because it was very odd, but it was fun at the same time, and it was a lot. It was and it was different because I spent so much time up in the, up with the writers and everything, that it was really fun spending the entire week or whatever the hell it was.
Right.
It must have been weird not being able to go back to sleep after the first table read.
Oh no, I did. Don't worry, I did.
Yeah,
But
how
did you know how to direct? I mean, that's a silly question, but because it looks complicated. Now, you can't just walk into it and do it, can you? Or do you kind of learn as you're going and you
Well,
just
I
look
had
at the shot?
directed stuff before, but
Okay.
not like, this was
Yeah.
the first like TV show that I directed. But I mean, doing the show when we used to do them, we'd edit them. I mean, truthfully, a
that's
lot
right,
of
yeah.
the shows were done. We did so much stuff on the set in terms of, looking at angles and fixing things or
Right.
whatever, that after a while it became, I was kind of used to it.
Yeah.
So I kind of knew what we were looking for, and it was, I don't know, it became, it was easier. That's
Right.
all.
Yeah. No, that makes
At this
sense.
point, I'm just scrutinizing the episode, hoping for just at least one bad shot that I can.
Yeah,
Well,
I am
not-
too
Oh, I'm sure
secretly.
there are some in there.
Was Judy Alterman your camera coordinator on this?
Yes.
She's also very.
Judy
helpful.
was great.
She
yes.
is helpful.
And I remember specifically, she came in and we sat down, the week of it, and went through specific shots and where the cameras were going to be set up. And because it was done with 4 cameras, and you had to the hardest part was Tom Sharonis could, he does it in his sleep, I guess, but the hardest part was just sort of visualizing how everything was going to cut together is what was interesting. It was fun.
Four cameras harder to figure out than one camera when you're doing a student film or something?
No, definitely, because you have to be aware of what's coming up next. Because these are filmed more like a play. They're not filmed like a movie where you do one shot, then move the camera and do another shot. And you had to be aware of what was necessary, what was coming up next or what was,
The thing I always liked about our show visually was that it moved. You're right. Like, I guess that's what you meant when you said a play. It really did move, and particularly when Jim was directing, it just was like almost like a dance. It was like a farce because you go out of one and into another. And in other sitcoms, you just sort of set the shot up and they're in there, and then there's not a lot of movement.
A dancing farce, so to speak.
A dancing farce.
A fado, so to speak.
That's right.
Some have called it a fado.
But that was the thing that we did. We did talk about a lot with other directors. We were always
well. That was also in the very initial conception of the show. That was the reason to have the set the way it was, so that it was like. And I specifically remember thinking of Taxi. It was one big room. So everything could be continuous.
And when other directors would come in, a lot of times they would try to do things like, good or bad. It wasn't like they were intentionally doing anything bad, but sometimes they would try to do things too stylistically or try and do unique things. And it was always like, you know what, this should be more like The Honeymooners. It should be more of a just wide stuff and not so much,
That's
special
true.
camera movements and things like that.
Some guy on the internet, I don't know why he wasted his time doing this. I think it was a college thesis or something, wrote something about how NewsRadio used a lot of wide and medium range shots, which I thought that was very smart, and I hope he got an A on it. But but it's weird because I just like seeing everyone all at once.
It was conscious. We always talked about that. We're always saying, that's what I meant by, even when we were down on the set, we'd sit there and look at the split screen, which would have the four cameras while the show was being recorded. So a lot of times you'd look at stuff and say, this needs to be wider, that needs to be whatever, that needs to be tighter. Don't you think we should do this? And that's literally what lent it to me to directing it too. It's like, because Paul, you could have gone in and directed 1 and 2 seconds too. I mean, you just didn't want to. I mean, but.
No,
because it was essentially
the cast would have turned on me immediately.
Well, they probably would have hated you.
I would have been fired.
Yes,
that's true. You know what? I would have had nothing to lose.
Right, you really would have.
Right. No, but I'm saying you could have, because of the way how much we kind of were doing that stuff all the time anyway. So it was.
I do remember, and I'm not sure which episode it is. There was one point at which the network said, just because they had their ideas, like, let's have more tighter close-ups. And we tried it once, and it just looked
funny.
It just looked weird, yeah.
What made us funny was how we reacted to one another. And so if somebody's just acting crazy and no one's really reacting to it, it wasn't as effective.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And a lot of the stuff that we did, too, truthfully played out in wide shots and played out better because there was, like we were talking about in an earlier episode, something would be going on in the foreground, and there would be some incredibly stupid thing in the background, which wasn't what you wanted to see.
It would be Andy Dick in the background.
Exactly. Andy
blowing
doing
up a computer.
Something, falling down, blowing up a computer. Yes, exactly. So,
Vicki, do you think, in terms of sitcom directors you've worked with, was Joe high energy or low energy?
He was high energy.
I see. That surprises me because Joe's not a low energy person.
He's even keel.
Yeah, even keel.
Well, he was even keel, but he kept a good pace. I guess there wasn't a lot of bullshit. Like some guys would come in and they had a lot of fake energy, but nothing was really happening.
I remember him.
Yeah, I know.
yes.
I'm not naming anybody.
Yes. Well, there were a couple, I guess, weren't there?
No, there's only one I'm thinking of.
Oh, boy.
Anyway, he knows who he is. That guy looks familiar to me too. Every time I see a guest actor on these episodes, I go, that guy looks familiar. And
I think he's gone on to do other things. Well, clearly he has.
What was what was he doing in this?
Joe,
forget.
Actually,
he was the friend.
Actually, this is a good opportunity to talk about the rehearsal process. So
yes.
So we would shoot on Fridays, but we would have the table read on Monday, which is when the cast would read the script for the first time, and then we would, have notes and start rewriting. But at the same time, the director and the cast would start rehearsing. So after the writers and the network and everyone left, Joe and Vicki, what's the first thing? You start at scene one and go, okay, do you walk over to the set where you're doing it and say stand there, or is it just?
It was basically like let's walk through this, wasn't it? I mean,
Yeah, nobody ever needed to tell us where to think about starting. It was just sort of second nature, and then we'd look at the area and kind of get an idea, unless it was something specific physically.
right.
We just had a natural sense. We never really did well in that particular set right there, that break room.
I think this is similar, I think, to the men's room set. As an actor, it felt bad there because the audience couldn't see you as well, and you couldn't hear them, and they couldn't hear you as well.
Yeah.
But ultimately, there were a lot of funny scenes in there.
No,
there
you're
were a lot
right.
of
We
funny
just,
things
yeah,
in
the
there.
But
feel of it.
It felt, or even worse, the elevator hallway felt like death.
Well, the other thing
Yeah.
about those too, some of these locations, not this one particular, but the bathroom, and it was really hard to film in them too. For some reason, it was like
think
odd getting good angles and getting
the bathroom, because there were 3 walls, and it was hard to.
yeah. So it was
There was
hard
no
to get
air
good
in
shots.
that one, too. It was always really hot when we were in the bathroom as a cast.
Oh, really?
I think that was you personally.
Was it
It was
really?
just that anticipation of having the audience there and that feeling of flop sweat because they're like 20 yards further away from you, and
Yeah, you're probably right.
Because they couldn't really see it very well.
couldn't
so.
see it and couldn't hear it very well. Spider, talk to me a little bit about the audience is there in the bleachers watching the show, and for the main set they see everything. But there were monitors also hung up above them. What was on those monitors?
The play, well, the actual footage.
Yeah, basically the line cut. We've got a guy up in the booth that's cutting to cameras, to specific cameras at certain times, so that the people in the auditorium, whatever, they're watching a cut of the show.
So he's directing it live the way they do it, like Saturday Night Live, saying
Exactly.
camera 1,
Just to
camera
give
3.
them an
But
idea
it's
of
a
what the
temp.
story is. Yes.
Yeah.
And did the I never actually paid attention. How many? The few times I've been to like TV tapings myself, I always end up looking up at the monitors instead of watching the action. What do you think the ratio of people who watch?
I have a theory about that too.
I think
Go
it's
ahead.
laughable. Yeah, I mean, I'd say 90% of the people, even if the action is right in front of them, if they're in the main bullpen, will look at the TV rather than look down across the cameras and look at the thing.
I had a theory about that too when we worked at Letterman. It was people were so used to watching it on their television that and they're so used to watching it being cut for them and being so that if you're just watching it flat, it's not quite as interesting. And I think that particularly with like Letterman, they'd enjoy because Hal Gurney used to cut into specific things, and if you weren't watching that, you'd be missing some of it. So
Right.
They didn't record those line cuts, did they?
We did have a temp record that we recorded on 3/4, but it was never anything that we could air or anything.
Yeah. Why did we record them then?
I think it was just to
No
use as
idea.
a basis in editing if we wanted to kind of go back and take a look.
Did Tony Heyman, the editor, ever use that as a basis in editing?
I can guarantee no. And that's because Tony's a good editor.
That's true.
Plus, the audience, at least in our soundstage, was it started up high and then it went up on a rake, so you couldn't really see the facial expressions if you were in the audience. You were looking
Yeah.
down at the top of our heads.
That's true.
often.
It's not really like being at a play where there's
Right.
the audience ends and then the.
well, there's also a bunch of cameras in the way too.
Yeah.
So I mean, a lot of it is obscured by all these cameras, and you can't see around them. So it's a little bit.
Yeah.
That's another reason why they tend to look at the monitors more than the live thing.
Yeah,
in
there's
front of them.
probably 20 to 30 feet between the first seat in the stage and the front of the actual set.
Yeah, because there's an enormous amount of room they have to have for the cameras.
I
and-
have a good question, Joe.
Yes.
As writers, we often finish the scripts, like a half an hour before the table read. As a director, then, were you frustrated that you didn't have the weekend before to have the script to think about what you wanted to do?
Were you cursing yourself?
No, not really, not at all. Because it was I was so used to it. I think it was I knew us and I knew the way we worked. So it was, and the actors were all, again, like I'm saying, they were all great in terms of giving them adjustments or changing something. They could do stuff very easily. You just make a slight suggestion, and Vicki, maybe if you did this, what about trying it like this? And it was,
And then she would say,
okay.
"Go to hell!"
Right. I want a bigger trailer. That kind of thing.
No, I think she would say, "I want a trailer or a dressing room,
That's
anything.
right. Yes.
Why do I have to change in the ladies' room?"
Yes.
Wait, why did me and Andy have those trailers? What happened there? And Candy, too, right?
we were.
I
in
never
out of-
remember
we
why.
ran out of dressing rooms.
Is that what it was?
Well, no, and Andy's was because he bought his own Airstream
that's
trailer
right.
as an
It's in his yard,
as
you
an
know.
investment, and
Oh,
now
there's
it's in
something,
his
by the
yard.
way, to point out in this that I now remember.
That belt I'm wearing.
The
That's
yes.
exactly it.
Vicky's belt. I don't mean to interrupt the trailer talk. That was interesting, but there's actually someone inside this thing. Would you remember
that's
this?
right. Fully.
Inside the machine?
Inside this copy
Wait,
machine.
here comes
yes.
the tie
Which,
thing.
This
Okay.
was actually difficult to do. We actually had to do this a couple of times because, and this is a perfect example of camera framing right here, where you're watching something. They're consoling Joe in the front, and of course, Dave is being eaten by the machine in the background. So this is a prime example of what we're talking about. Of
You
This
mean
is
there's
also
a person inside that grabbing his
yes,
tie?
it was. Who was it? It was.
Phil Dicker?
No, it was one of the prop people. I think. I just
Really?
forget
Jody
who-
Mann?
Jody?
I think it was Jody.
She's
as a matter
tiny
of fact.
enough to
Yeah,
get in there.
she could fit in there.
Yeah.
And when we were doing it, she had to. It was hollow inside, and she had to pull it down. And the problem was we had to do it several times because it didn't look real. Because Dave kept saying, "I don't know, it doesn't feel right." And so I had to say to her, "Jody, really pull it hard." Because
Right.
I mean, but she said, "But I'm afraid I'm
On
going
the
to hurt
set
him." And I
or when
said,
you guys were alone?
"No, when we actually got
Right.
to filming it,
Right.
yeah, and alone too."
All right.
Oh my God, that's so dirty.
Who approved that shirt for Andy? I'm so distracted.
We were beyond the point of approval.
I know it.
What is Andy
Oh my
doing?
God, what is he doing?
I don't know, but I guarantee that he probably did at least 40 more seconds of it before we cut the camera.
Okay. Okay. All right now.
Now we're getting towards the end of the episode. I think. Is this the one I'm thinking of? Where at the end, Dave has to deliver a eulogy.
Yes, it
Okay.
is.
And
Rat funeral?
no, not Rat Funeral.
You know what? I liked that episode.
No, you didn't.
I
You never.
did. It used to make me crack up when we were standing in that hall making
Well, that
those
was cracking
for the
up
wrong
for
reason.
the wrong
I thought it
reasons.
was a
That
funny
like,
idea.
Oh my God, this is the worst.
I thought it was a funny idea.
Yeah, NBC hated that one also.
well,
But that was part. We had to do that for
That
a
was
reason.
one of their theme nights. It was
That's
three
right.
weddings and a funeral.
Yeah, it was when the
Right.
movie Four Weddings and a Funeral was big, and so they said
Right.
this coming up this Tuesday on
Great
NBC.
idea.
Three weddings and a
Three weddings and a funeral.
and so we got the funeral.
Yeah.
And then they objected because I don't want to do a funeral, so we made it that there was a rat problem in the office, and then everyone was upset at Dave for actually killing the rat.
And the greatest story about that whole thing was we got a letter after we did the episode from an animal rights organization with a list of people on the list, and they were saying, "We are outraged that you did this cruelty to rats." Do you remember this?
I do remember it.
Cruelty to a rat is an animal, no matter what, blah 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 blah. And on the byline thing on the side of the thing, with a list of all the people donating who were part of board members, Phil Hartman.
I don't think Phil personally approved that.
I don't think Phil really knew what the hell was anything about that, but I remember we laughed our heads off about that.
That also reminds me of one of the few awards the show won, which was from some anti-tobacco group for the smoking episode, congratulating
know
us.
about that.
Yes, congratulating us for depicting the horrors of tobacco use, which is ironic considering that most of the writing staff smoked
Yes.
nonstop.
That's what really prompted the episode, really, was that how much everyone smoked.
Now I remember coming up, Dave, and I want to say it because I know when we get there, we get to the credits pretty quickly. But at the end of this, Dave has to deliver a eulogy for a person he doesn't really know, and
Yes.
it turns out that. All I remember is that the first thing we wanted to do we couldn't do.
Yes.
What was
Right.
Spider
We
to say
couldn't
it?
do it.
What was the first way it was supposed to be?
I believe he was a Nazi supporter.
He was
Yeah.
supposed to be a Nazi, yes,
Yeah.
originally.
oh, that's right.
And then it
Yeah.
ended up being.
I think it was
Ku
still
Klux Klan, I
Nazi.
think.
or
We have
was
that footage too, and it may be on this DVD.
I think it ends up being a generic Klan meeting, as I recall. Not really the Ku Klux Klan, but guys with robes.
just
Like
just
the-
that other clan.
the K Klux
creepier than
Klan
the Nazi
or
thing.
something. Yeah, it's
That's
really.
equally inappropriate.
I
if you
think
have
that's what it is. I-
Issues.
It might have been that, or maybe. Well, I remember even at the very beginning saying we don't want swastikas,
Yes.
and I think we should all be applauded for having that.
It was a
sensitivity.
great joke. It was a
Yeah.
great joke. I mean, like what, you know.
Yeah, because Dave is very upset. No one knew this guy. I'm going to be the one to go speak for him.
Yeah.
And
now,
you guys were going for the most horrific.
yeah. You,
Well, I
Possible
remember
thought.
when we were writing it, the big question was, well, what the hell is the funeral? What is he doing at the funeral at the end? And then, of course, the joke was, it's got to be, it's like the
worst-
producers. It's got to be the most horrifying thing you can imagine what he's doing there, you know. And he's making this nice speech, because Dave's defending this guy finally at the end of it, is the whole premise, right?
now I'm really excited to see this last scene because I can't even remember
Yeah.
what it
I remember
actually
the
looked
shot, actually, now we're saying it. It was a tracking shot, I believe, which we may have cut, but...
like. Starting on Dave and
Yes,
pulling-
here
oh,
it
here
is. Yes, this was kind of cool doing this, because
I can't claim that I knew Ted well.
this is another example of how it was directed.
Is this an example of mise en scène?
Yes.
Wow.
You'll notice.
Well, I like what you did with
Watch,
the lighting.
watch
there.
this. This is something
very
we
moving.
rarely did in the show.
That's true.
That's because
A
it's
camera move.
shaky. We're on a
I'm wearing Ku Klux Klan hats. Why is that
Now I
okay?
remember. Yes.
Yes.
Originally, the original conception was more that sort of white, black, and red
Right.
Reichstag, whatever.
Yeah.
I remember being very proud of that shot, though, thinking that's an actual
And-
movement and.
And by the way, finally we
There's
can
a
come
lot
to a
of
shot that I can
Yeah.
that I can tease you about because it's, in conception that's a great shot, but as Spider said, it did look like someone was in a canoe on a choppy river,
didn't.
bumping their
That's
way
not
back.
my fault. Don't blame me.
Oh, so you?
I didn't film
so,
it.
So you blame your crew?
I blame
a
the
director
crew.
who blames his
Yes.
crew.
Well,
Yes.
thank God the director didn't ask for a
Terribly
second
done
take.
shot.
I'm gonna take away your DGA card.
I think that's already happened.
It's terrible. Sam Epstein.
I blame.
no
I blame Robert Spina for
Hold it.
that.
I've been looking at these credits all day. Sam Epstein was your first AD on this?
Yeah. Oh, sure, Sam.
Who
Yeah.
was that?
No, he was filling in for someone else.
Too
For-
late.
no.
Too late now.